Okay, so my project is on LGBT culture and why do older LGBT members have lower kinships and networks. So the early LGBT networks, 2.2% of older LGBT adults aged 50 to 64 have a weaker kinship or friend network because if you look back at Stonewall riots, not a lot of LGBT people felt safe at the time. So because of this, there's a significant change. There's a significant decrease in people who see their parents never or less often, which is just for never it's just over 30%, and then less often it's just under 15%. But this was only about 521,000 people surveyed, which was the 2.2% of them. So then looking at table 4 and figure 4 with friends, it's very interesting to see how close the friend networks are for friends but not family. The downward curve is almost the exact same, and there's not really a lot of significant changes. So then there's the difference between family kinships and the friend network. So about 33% of older LGBT adults have less than half their friends living near them, which you can see in table 4 and in figure 4. So only 12.6 are in their area, and then interestingly enough, only 15% of heterosexual adults have all their friends living in the same area, compared to LGBT members, which have 12.6%. So why are these networks so low? It was very illegal to be LGBT in most states and in other countries at the time. So being LGBT was frowned upon, and people could lose their jobs, or they were homeless, and these people were just didn't have a good life at that point. So why are they so distant still? Older LGBT members still probably feel like outcasts. Their mother might not be alive now. They don't feel safe with their parents because of the fact that they were oppressed in the 60s. So only about 8.3% of older LGBT members see their mother daily. I find it interesting that about 20% see them less often compared to that at least once per week, which is 31%. And I thought it would be much bigger. And then in table 5, they're describing how the distance between where their mother lives, and it's very similar to table 4. So most people have them less than 15 minutes away, where I thought the 21% of more than 2 hours, or I'm sorry, more than 2 hours would be. So on top of that, so what was Stonewall? Stonewall was a mafia-run bar in the late 1960s where people who were LGBT and not out felt like they had a place to go. The police raided the bar one night in 1969 because there was an inflation on alcohol prices, and just the police raided the bar and it turned into a riot. And they loaded all the people who had jobs, fled at the time, and then they lined up people into 2 lines, and if they suspected you were a transvestite, you were put into another line, and they checked IDs. And they were arresting people, blah, blah, blah. So then on top of this, what were these issues in the 60s that caused them to feel so oppressed and not included? There was no place for them to go. They were literally homeless. So they turned to this bar in New York because they felt included. And you were a total outcast as an LGBT member, and you could be killed. So what did happen during Stonewall? So after the police started arresting people, the police didn't really expect them to riot, so they started dragging them out, and the police went into the bar and shut all the doors and grabbed a heterosexual man and just beat him to almost death. So then these LGBT members and any of the other protesters who were on the street started calling the police pigs, and then the police started to attack anyone they could. So they forced the police to retreat finally, and in turn, the police were pretty humiliated. So let's back up for a second. So talking about Stonewall, all these issues that happened before Stonewall and then continued could be the issues that, or these issues cause those networks to be so low because no one felt safe, or they still don't feel safe because they're an older LGBT member compared to my generation. And like stated before, you were an outcast. You could lose your job, you could end up homeless, like anything. So they use electroshock therapy for LGBT members. So which means you were strapped into a chair and you were shocked. And if you kept thinking you were gay or not straight, they would continue to shock you until you're like, okay, I'm straight. And they did that for years. So the interesting points for this, in this study, there were more heterosexual adults surveyed, about 97% compared to the 2.2% of LGBT members. So this is definitely skewed. And they called older LGBT adults were only aged 50 to 64 compared to what they were originally thinking of 62 plus, which is a tiny, tiny age group. And because of this lower kinship, these LGBT members lack companionship with friends, so they feel more lonely. So, in summary, more LGBT members have smaller kinships just because of the oppression they have faced in the past. More heterosexual people were interviewed, and more heterosexual adults live closer or were closer with their family. And surprisingly, LGBT and heterosexual adults have a very, very similar percentage with their friends. And their kinships still might be low because not every LGBT member still feels accepted. And Stonewall was one of the major turning points for these LGBT members to have kinship. So overall, just be you and be proud of who you are. And then resource page 1 and continued.